Welcome to the March 2021 edition of the Engineering Rocks podcast. I'll be your host today. I'm Brian Icerman, Senior Vice President, Jones Edmonds. Today, we're going to go through a quick summary of some of the legislative topics and regulatory changes that might be facing utilities in the future. And we'll be joined here today by Rick Hutton with GRU. Rick is a supervising engineer in the Water Wastewater Planning Group. He is also serving as the FWEA Utility Council President midway through his 2-year term. And for those of you who aren't aware, the Utility Council is comprised of utilities from across the state that look to achieve public health and environmental goals in a cost-effective manner through collaboration on common objectives to support and encourage cost-effective management and to encourage sound policies related to water, wastewater treatment, collection, reclamation, and disposal. Having participated in the Utility Council for the past couple of years as a corporate member, I can say, Rick, it's an honor to have you here, a privilege. I know it's a great group of folks in that group, and to be elected president is quite the honor. So welcome to the Engineering Rocks podcast.
Good morning, Brian, and welcome everybody. Really appreciate being here. Appreciate you all inviting me. I was going to say it's been quite an honor to serve with the Utility Council and have the opportunity to work with leaders in our industry on such an important function. And of course, I think we all, I really appreciate the dedication we all have towards ensuring we have clean, safe drinking water and sanitation for our communities, protecting public health and the environment. And as Brian said, ensuring that we can continue to provide our services in a way that's affordable to our customers. So we have a lot of can-do people in our organization, and we really appreciate all the support that we have, both from our utility members, but also our consultants and contractors that really contribute to make our organization really strong, I think. So really also fortunate to have really good representation from Hopping Green and Sam's, David Childs, as well as, we work a lot with the FWEA Utility Council, who sort of focuses more on water issues. So good to be here.
And again, thanks for joining us. I couldn't help but notice you had a bit of a smile on your face when you heard the intro music. So I'd like to, point out that, aside from working at GRU and being Utility Council President, Rick, you've also got a band. Tell us a little about the band that we heard some of the intro music about.
Oh, well, so I do play in a rock and roll band. It's the name of the band is actually called Crooked Council. So I'm in the Utility Council and I'm in a band called Crooked Council, and the councils are spelled differently, so I constantly get them mixed up. But yeah, we play mostly classic rock and roll, several venues around Gainesville area. So it's a lot of fun. And I play guitar and sing, do some lead guitar and some singing. We also have a really good female vocalist that can really belt out the Janis Joplin and Hart and Pat Benatar type stuff too. And Brian put on some Santana. Santana's one of the bands that we play a lot of. So if you're ever going to be in the Gainesville area on Friday or Saturday, check us out. I'll do the advertisement. Check us out, Crooked Council. You can Google us on our website or Facebook too.
Awesome. Yeah, my wife and I will definitely have to come check that out. I think we had plans to do it right before the pandemic, and now here we are a year later. So maybe we'll venture out here one evening and come listen to you guys.
We're still doing it because all of our venues are outdoors.
Awesome. Awesome. So hey, let's talk big picture here first before we dive into too much. Just give us an idea of the challenges you think utilities are going to face over the next 5 to 10 years, and what are some things you guys have been planning at GRU to kind of get ahead of this, and what do you think other utilities might do to keep serving folks, like you said, cost effectively?
Well, and I think you used the term cost effectively, which is really important, because I sort of think our single greatest challenge is how do we meet all our challenges and still be affordable? So we have a lot of pressures on us to solve a lot of different problems. As you know, Florida is a water state. Like people come here, they live here, drawn here to a large extent because of water. It's also pretty well recognized that from a water supply is a big issue for Florida if we're going to continue to have more population, having adequate water supply without damaging our natural resources. And then we have some, you know, ongoing water quality issues that if, you know, we as a state don't take action on, they're going to get worse. We really need them to get better. So it is, you know, we've been, particularly the last few years, gotten a lot of interest in our industry from legislative and elected leaders, which I guess in a sense is good, since they recognize, hey, we're a key player in sort of dealing with a lot of these issues, which could be a positive. The downside, though, is that, you know, a lot of times, you know, tend to be recognized more for, you know, things that go wrong, like a sanitary sewer overflow, and not appreciated as much for all the good that we do, you know, for all the, you know, we treat and either dispose of properly or reuse 1.5 billion gallons of water a day. And we collectively have about, let me get my statistics right. On piping. How much piping do we have, Brian? I was supposed to have that statistic handy.
Something like 10 times around the world? Is that
10 times around the world. Thank you so much. I missed my notes there. Enough pipe to go around the world 10 times. So we operate a lot of facilities. And so one of our challenges is we're often, you know, get attention for things that happen wrong. And then the other thing is we oftentimes get viewed as having deep pockets, you know, but the reality is, we all know as well, where does the money come from for our budgets? It all comes from our ratepayers. And so, you know, we have to be smart if we're going to solve our issues and work through some of the water issues of the state. We got to be smart about it. Some of the things that, you know, of course, that are big challenges, as I mentioned, water supply. Those tend to be discussed on a regional basis, but as you know, Central Florida Water Initiative just recently got ratified by the legislature. Here in North Florida, there's a lot of work going on right now on water supply issues, and probably going to be some type of, there will be some recovery strategies that are put in place here as well. Also, aging infrastructure is a challenge for us, as well as other industries, with all the piping and other, you know, facilities we operate, keeping up with that and replacing those components as they age. And of course, resiliency and sustainability, particularly in light of climate change, is going to continue to be an issue for us, perhaps more so in coastal communities, but also inland too, as we get more severe storms. And addressing all those and staying affordable is a challenge.
Yeah, I recall at the legislative fly-in last week that there was an independent study done that Florida has the lowest rates for water and wastewater in the country, and we are facing some of the steepest challenges on water supply and water quality. And I know, you know, moving into kind of some of the specifics of the bills, you know, transitioning to the Clean Waterway Act here. Let's talk about it passed last year. It had a lot of that in it. Is that something that the Utility Council supported, or is that something they were against? And talk a little bit about why or why not they were for that legislation.
So one of the things we try to do is be on the side of sound science. So sound science and sound fiscal policy at the same time. And so we supported the Clean Waterways Act really because I think fundamentally, most of it is really based on pretty good science. It was based on a large extent by some recommendations by the Blue-Green Algae Task Force. We also provided a lot of input into the bill. And I know, you know, there is some additional regulation that's going to go on to the water and wastewater industry in Florida. So is it maybe atypical for an industry to say, hey, we want to advocate for more regulation? But we think that it's common sense. And so one area interest was the asset management portion of that legislation that directed DEP to develop new rules for wastewater systems for managing their collection systems. And really part of the reason why we had been promoting that is there has been a lot of emphasis on sanitary sewer overflows, SSOs, and there had been a lot of momentum on, hey, we need to, by a lot of legislative leaders of, hey, we need to just really find these utilities and come after them and give them steeper and steeper penalties because the perception was is SSOs are caused by mismanagement of our collection systems. And so we wanted to change the conversation and say, well, instead of penalizing us for each SSO, because I think folks in our industry kind of know that actually the vast majority of sanitary sewer overflows are due to factors that utilities either can't control or have limited control over. But what we do have control over is, are we investing properly in our collection systems, maintaining them, replacing them? So this bill and the asset management portion of it really emphasizes, hey, let's promote and push utilities to make sure that they're using best industry practices for assessing and keeping up with maintaining and replacing their collection systems.
Yeah, I remember as that was going through, that was a big push. You guys had made a lot of meetings that, this was something you supported and you wanted to get it done right. And, it was all about doing the right things to keep the areas you can control under control. And then let's address what we can't control when it comes up, right? If you have a contractor drill into your line,
right
away, that's, not really a utility management challenge. If you've gone out there and marked them and done everything you can do, at some point, you can't take control over their directional drill rig, right? They're gonna end up drilling where they're gonna drill. So
right. And one thing for future, something we're trying to push towards more in the future is, hey, when that happens, we would love it if DEP would go after that entity rather than us.
Right.
Because as it is, we get fined if somebody drills into our pipe.
Yeah.
So the other, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, sir.
I was just gonna, at a high level too, that bill also included ratification of the biosolids rule, which that was based on recommendations from this technical advisory committee from last year. Also had some input from the utility council. Essentially that those new, it ratified the what the rule that DEP had developed, which was based on this technical advisory committee, but it will help to alleviate some of the issues that have occurred or either occurred or allegedly occurred in some cases from biosolids application, and really, but also ensures that we will be able to continue to use biosolids land application where it can be done in a way that's sustainable and protective of the environment. So that was another part. And then also included that DEP is going to move forward with developing rules to allow potable reuse, which I know we're going to talk about in more detail later, but as another tool in the toolbox for meeting some of the water supply challenges we have in the state.
Absolutely. I think that's a great segue into one of the next questions we had talked about, which is moving into this year's legislation. And there's some bills going through that are regarding the potable reuse or reclaimed water. And I don't want to put you on the spot as to whether or not you guys are for or against or how the different pieces are, but in general, what do you think the goals are from Senate Bill 64 and House Bill 263 with regards to what's the legislature really driving at?
So in the bills you're referring to, it's a Senate Bill 64 and House Bill 263. They're originally the same bill. There's some difference between them now, but those essentially are promoting again the ability to do potable reuse. But there is a provision in those bills that we had some concern over, which is the surface water elimination provision. And so one of the things you got to recognize too with the way the legislature works is if there is a bill or something that leadership and the legislature wants, it's this, you can influence it. You don't necessarily always get exactly what you want. One of the things that provision that is in there is this, as I mentioned, the surface water discharge elimination provision. The bill, as was originally filed, we were able to get some, have some influence on some of the provisions of the bill, but essentially it requires elimination of surface water discharges within a 5-year period. Incidentally, that period we feel like is really too short, so we're hopeful that maybe they'll extend that timeline and that. Basically, there's some exceptions for if you're a small or disadvantaged utility. Also, if the surface water discharge has an environmental benefit, or if you're currently regulated, like with the surface water, the ocean outfall, you get some relief from this rule. But in a lot of cases, it's going to be pretty substantial requirement on particularly some of our coastal utilities that that have a surface water discharge. The Senate bill has a provision that allows you to do an economic feasibility analysis. So it gives you some relief if you can demonstrate that the complete elimination of surface water discharge isn't economically feasible. The House bill, as it most recently had had an amendment that took out that economic feasibility. So we have a lot of concerns about that because, I would say, I think we've mentioned before, Florida is #1 in reuse. We're really doing, as a state, we're really doing an excellent job of reuse. This is kind of smacks of a one-size-fits-all. Like, hey, a good idea. Let's just eliminate surface water discharge. That way, all that water that's going to the surface water discharge could be reused. That sounds good at a high level, but depending on the situation, that can be very, very expensive.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think, like we've talked about at the beginning, the Utility Council is very interested, and I think utilities in Florida in general are using reuse well. You just said it; they're #1 in the state, and going to direct potable reuse is something that's a relatively new technology, and that's something I think a lot of folks are interested in. But how does that, from a public perspective, I think a lot of their questions are going to come in on, is it safe, and how much is it going to cost me? Has the Utility Council spent any time kind of putting their arms around those questions?
Yes. So let me, before I answer that, I would want to make one clarification because I got a question in the chat room. Hey, does that legislation this year, does it allow for wet weather discharge? And I think it still would allow wet weather discharge to surface water, but essentially would eliminate, dry weather discharge. As you indicated, so on potable reuse, one of the things that's really an evolving field, and so it's potable reuse has been being done, particularly in other countries for a really long time, particularly when you go in Israel and some of the Middle East where they're in the desert, they've had to do those kinds of things. So the technology's around, and it's been around, and it's been done in California and other places in the United States. One of the keys is just, can you do it cost effectively? Because the cost of taking wastewater, treating it to potable standards, which means for us also, the multiple barrier approach, right? So you can't have, if one system fails, all of a sudden there's a public health concern. You've got to have multiple barriers, and you really need to have what was part of this. This Potable Reuse Commission had been convened over the last couple of years to help develop a framework, and ultimately DEP is to develop rules that would set up a framework for if you're going to do potable reuse in Florida, this is what you got to do. And the devil will be in the detail of that. What does that actually require? And of course, making sure that we have all the public health protections we need, but at the same time, allowing for newer technologies to be developed so that we can do this more cost effectively. And so this is the kind of thing that that's going to evolve over the next many years. It is a lot more expensive to treat wastewater to become potable water than it is to pull water out of the aquifer. There's no doubt about it. So the incremental cost is a lot more. So I don't think we're ready as an industry to say, hey, let's start using all of our effluent for potable reuse and let that take the place of groundwater. That would be very, very expensive. But over the next decades, we're going to see more and more of that.
Yeah, so safe to say that it's a proven safe technology, while it may be newer in the United States and certainly new to Florida, something that I think utilities would get comfortable with. But the ability to provide all these services at the lowest cost of any state would be greatly in jeopardy. Does that sound about right?
I'd say so. I mean, that's why, I think we always say, hey, we got to be smart about implementing things. I mean, I think we recognize in many parts of the state that, man, the days of just saying, hey, we can just expand, we need more water supply, we'll just get our permit renewed for more water than last time, and we'll just pump more groundwater. I mean, there's some parts of the state you can do that, but particularly in areas where you got a lot of population growth, not so much. So, there's not like a cheap alternative for getting more water. And so you're going to have to go to more expensive things like potable reuse, in some cases, desalination, that's very expensive too. So other technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't want to take up too much more time, and everyone who's both watching out there in internet land, and I know you're very busy yourself, and podcasts are more digestible at this time range, but I do want to give you an opportunity to speak about what it's been like to be the president of the Utility Council in a year in which we had to go through the changes with COVID. And I know you could probably talk for a day on that, but if you just give us a snippet about what that's been like and how that's, it's really helped strengthen each other by bouncing ideas off each other, and give us a little insight into that process.
So I've been really impressed with our industry and our leaders, and I guess it shouldn't be a surprise, because I think, we rely a lot on each other and help each other to figure out problems. And so one of the things that we started pretty early on, and I have to give a shout out to Lisa Wilson Davis, because she kind of ran these we had these weekly COVID calls, and that was an opportunity for us utilities and other folks in the industry to kind of share our experiences, our ideas, help each other out. For a while, early on, there was this, as you might remember, a shortage of masks. And man, there was a big push to, man, we got to get enough masks for everybody to wear masks. And so we coordinated together on that. I was kind of amazed, though, that, as I understand it, I don't think any of the utilities had any major disruptions in their operations because of COVID, even though now we certainly had folks, I think we've all had folks that have gotten COVID, and, it's caused some hardships, but I don't think any of us have really interrupted service because of COVID. So I've been very impressed in how well we've worked together. I know on the utility council side, we've continued to conduct our business, because at the same time COVID's going on, we've got all these things we've described here, new rules coming out, legislative session. Of course, we, like everybody else, have sort of adapted to using Zoom and Teams and all those other softwares, which has been very, very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I miss getting to go to some of those monthly meetings, but the Zoom meetings has made it more convenient to make more of them, right? It's easier to fit in the schedule. So there's pros and cons to what we've been through. Well, Rick, I really appreciate you joining us. I do want to allow just a brief moment if there are any other questions from the audience. I appreciate the question we got from St. Johns County, but if there are any others that want to shout in with a question or thoughts, we're happy to have you. If not, we really appreciate everyone taking the time this morning, like I said, to join us. And thank you again, Rick. Congratulations on your post as Utility Council President, and hopefully this next year will be a little smoother now that we've been through some of the challenges we got through this past year.
I'm happy to take any questions if people got them too.
All right, I guess we're seeing none. We'll go ahead and call it a wrap. Thank you again, Rick Hutton with GRU, for joining us on the March 2021 edition of Engineering Rocks podcast. And thank you for everyone coming in. Well, hold on, we got one more late edition. Does the Utility Council have a position on the pending sanitary sewer lateral bill?
Well, we've been generally supportive. I think, we always want to do is where possible, provide flexibility. And so, one of the earlier concerns about the bill that it seemed to like sort of prescribe, hey, if you're going to have a lateral program, this is exactly what it's got to be. And so, we've tried to influence it to kind of make it so that it provides some flexibility. And, if you want to do a lateral program, the bill never said you have to do, and what I mean by a lateral program, a program where you're either the utilities going in and replacing private laterals or requiring homeowners to do it. I think, that's something that, when we talk to different utilities, everybody's got kind of a different thought about it, but it's, as we kind of all know, it's very difficult once you start saying, hey, I'm going to get on the customer's property and make them do things. That becomes a lot more difficult. So I think we've tried to influence that bill to make it sort of less prescriptive, it's helpful to have abilities to implement that type of program, like to try to allow flexibility for utilities if they want to do that, to have flexibility as to how they want to run it.
That makes a lot of sense. I got a second question coming in here. Was the primary motivator for the House and Senate bills eliminating surface water discharge to promote reuse or more for water quality? It is frustrating because our AWT plant, like many other discharges, produces a lot of clean water.
Yeah, I agree. And as I understand it, the motivation is this thought of, hey, all this water, you're throwing it away, why not take it and reuse it? So if money is no object, sounds like a good idea. But I agree, a lot of utilities have really invested a lot of money in producing really clean water that's not having a negative environmental impact on the surface water. But the thought is, though, well, it could be used for another purpose. Well, yeah, that's true, but you got to look at the situation and figure out, if it can be done cost effectively. And particularly if you're looking, I guess I'll elaborate a little bit too, is, on a statewide basis, water supply issues are addressed by the water management districts in general, and they tend to be looked at regionally, which makes a lot of sense. And it makes a lot of sense for a given region to the processes that are in place right now, where they develop these minimum flows and levels and develop water supply plans for the regions. I mean, those make sense for trying to bring the stakeholders together to figure out the most cost-effective solutions to these water supply issues. So I think we support continuing to use regional processes for solving water supply issues, as opposed to sort of saying, hey, let's do statewide mandates that require things like eliminating surface water discharges.
Yeah, that reminds me of the term you guys used a lot last year with the Clean Waterways Act, which is that you support science-based activities,
yes.
Right? When you can get in and look at how it's going to affect different regions, let's do the right thing in that area. And to the question, I think if you read those bills, you don't have to get very far into them to see. I think it's right at the beginning. It starts to describe that water is a precious resource and it should be reused, right? So from that point on, I think you can get a pretty good tone of that. It's more about how you described, Rick. The recapture is more important than necessarily the water quality downstream. Even though we're getting plenty of push on that front as well with advanced waste treatment pushes and springs water quality and TMDLs, which were all part of the Clean Waterways Act. But that was last year's bill, and this year's bill now is about capturing as much as we can.
Right.
So, got one last question, and then I think we might be out of time. But has the development community weighed in at all in the reuse bills? Do we know of any other industries chiming in on these?
Not really. I mean, this reuse bill does have some provisions for gray water systems. I think that was sort of a regional thing that, somebody wanted in there. But as a whole, there really hasn't been a lot of input from them on that. Yeah. It's a good question because it ultimately may affect them pretty substantially.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, it's been viewed mostly as an encouragement to direct potable reuse or indirect, but it could have some impacts on the development community for sure, between reuse being distributed or rates or other pieces that utilities may try to use to solve that challenge.
Somebody has to pay.
That is correct. These projects will not be be free. And, the utilities have spent a lot of money to invest in their current systems, and some of the regulations may require them to make significant modifications before those life cycles come due. So that has an additional cost as well. All right, seeing no other questions and comments and being out of time at 11:30, again, we really appreciate everyone's time this morning, and thank you again, Rick, for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you again soon, and maybe out and about town, and we'll maybe see you at a council show.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye now.